Hi, good afternoon, everyone. This is Danielle Schweilock in CPP at Penn Law. Thank you for joining us for our presentation on Going In-House, What I Wish I Knew. This is all put together thanks to our terrific alum and coordinator, Erica Gartenberg. She, as I mentioned, received her JD from the University of Pennsylvania Law School and her BA cum laude from the University of Florida. She practiced civil and white-collar litigation for 7 years at Fried Frank in New York and Baker Hostetler before transitioning to legal recruiting and consulting. Before founding Rocky Mountain Legal Search, where she is now, Erica worked at a top-caliber legal recruiting boutique, and she's placed attorneys in roles ranging from law firm associates to general counsel and works with law firms of all sizes and scales, corporations, startups in a variety of industries, from financial services to publishing. Erica, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Danielle, and thank you to our panelists. We have a lot of great information to get to you guys, so I just want to start with the panelists introducing themselves in alphabetical order, starting with Adam Adler.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. I'm Adam Adler. I graduated from Penn in 2006 from the law school, and then I worked at Fried Frank between 2006 and 2011 in their litigation department, where I practiced general commercial litigation and white-collar litigation. And since 2011, I've worked at Georgetown University in the general counsel's office. I'm a university counsel here, and I advise faculty and staff and deans and the board on issues relating to student affairs, athletics, and public safety, and look forward to talking with you today.
Hi, I'm Seth Blinder. I'm an 07 grad from the law school. I'm currently at Goldman Sachs, where I'm responsible for their consumer privacy program. Basically, making sure that as Goldman gets into the sort of the consumer and digital space, that we're taking the proper steps regarding personal data. I started my career out of law school at Cleary Gottlieb in New York as an M&A lawyer, and then moved around a bit. And immediately before Goldman, I was at MasterCard, where I was on the privacy legal team.
Derek?
Shall I go?
Yeah.
Sure. Sorry, I alphabetical first name versus last name. I got a little confused there. Sorry. Hi, I'm Derek Witt. Had the pleasure of being in the same class as Erica. I started out in New York at Sullivan & Cromwell doing mainly M&A work. Did that for a couple of years, and then went out west to Fenwick & West out in Mountain View, California, which is kind of the Silicon Valley area of California. Did mainly startups, venture capital, also M&A as well. And then joined Tastemade just over 2 years ago. I'm their sole lawyer out there right now. And if you haven't heard of Tastemade, it's a digital media startup based in Santa Monica. We produce and program digital video content and food, travel, lifestyle, home design across around the world, really, kind of in 8 different languages on platforms like Facebook and Snapchat, as well as our own apps and own channels. I'm very happy to be here.
Gali?
Hi, everybody. I'm Gali Parat. I graduated in 2009. And afterwards, I clerked for a year for a federal judge in Philadelphia. And then I was at Deckard in their white-collar group doing white-collar criminal defense work for 6 years. I left about a little over a year and a half ago to go in-house to Teva Pharmaceuticals. Teva is one of the top 10 largest pharma companies in the world. And I work to manage their government investigations and related litigation and support the compliance and audit teams.
And I'm Arnina Churkin. I graduated from the law school in 2012. I went to Fried Frank in New York until about 4 years, and then I ended up at Amazon out in Seattle. I was practicing real estate at Fried Frank, and I'm one of the few real estate counsels here at Amazon. I support Amazon Web Services, leasing and acquisitions of land for data centers globally.
Marnina's going to tell us where Amazon's headquarters are going to be next, right?
If I only knew.
All right, so now I'm going to start sharing my screen for everyone. You will, I think, lose our panelists' beautiful faces, but let's begin the PowerPoint. One moment. All right, is this good for everyone? Panelists, can you see my screen?
Yep.
Great. All right, so meet the panelists. There we go. I guess Danielle introduced me, but again, I'm currently a legal recruiter. I place people in-house and at firms, and we'll sort of be speaking from our perspective. All right, so we're going to start with what to do while you're in law school, and I'd like Seth to sort of take the first bullet point here.
Yeah, thanks, Erica. So I guess the first piece of advice that I would give you guys is think about what are the things that you like to do. And the reason that I sort of focus on that is I think there's a lot of different types of legal jobs out there, right? You know, people can go be a litigator, you can do corporate work, you can do a lot of different things. Also, I think lawyers are often in roles that are far more than purely practice, especially in-house, and you're much more focusing on advisory work as well as kind of, you know, doing sort of actual legal practice on a day-to-day basis. And so I think it's really important to understand what the things are that you enjoy, right? Like, do you enjoy writing briefs? Do you enjoy doing legal research? Do you enjoy, you know, working on contracts? I don't know if people are spending time in law school doing that. I mean, I can tell you when I was in law school, I was on the board of my journal, and one of the things that my role on the board was that I was the manager. And so through that, I was responsible for a budget. I was responsible for planning events, and I was responsible really for thinking about things in like a really holistic kind of way. And I found that I enjoyed that type of work almost as much as I enjoyed the stuff that I was doing in my classes. And that made me think as I got into practice later on that, you know, sort of swooping in, doing a deal or a case and swooping away was a lot less compelling to me than really understanding how an organization works. And so I think it's really important to sort of have a lot of different experiences and see what resonates the most with you, because that can provide some really helpful insight into what type of job or career you may find most fulfilling.
And Marnina, that will sort of dovetail into what you wanted to speak about.
Sure, thanks. I think it's great to also find practical experience while you're in law school. I think the journal example is great. Also, clinics, if you can get into one. I think something also little known at Penn Law is you can do an externship. And I know there's some that are set, but you can also create one if you get approval and you can figure it out. So when I was a 3L, I knew I wanted to do real estate. That's what I was going to go do at Fried Frank. And I had gone to a panel where one of the real estate counsels from Penn's Office of General Counsel came and spoke. And I was fascinated. So I went to the general counsel's office and met with the two real estate lawyers, asked if I could do an externship and planned it out, talked about the kind of work we would do. And I did that my 3L year. So I think it's, if you know what you want to do or you're interested in something, there's tons of stuff in Philadelphia and there's tons of ways to get involved. And I just encourage to go out and take those opportunities when they're there.
And, you know, I think it's important for everyone to remember that you don't need to be doing this for a quote-unquote resume builder. Just do it as research to figure out what you like and what you don't like. I think that is really important. And the last thing I wanted to briefly talk about while you're in law school is picking a law firm. And I know that Derek has some thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing to just really keep in mind is that it's not your final and last decision that you ever make for your career. I think law is unique in that people do tend to jump around a lot, and it really serves different purposes depending on where you end up. And it's not really just a pure prestige thing. It's a thing of what kind of practice you ultimately want to do. And as a 3L or a 2L looking at firms, I hadn't already decided I wanted to be in-house at a startup in California. I mean, I think concepts of that were intriguing, but it was certainly not kind of my end goal at that point. At that point, I thought I wanted to be an M&A lawyer, and so I went to S&C and did M&A. But I soon found that that wasn't my calling. And from observing where people at S&C would go, it kind of is in line with their natural clientele and what they what work they do. So most people go into finance or banks or funds and such. And so to really decide, all right, I do have this path that I foresee, and it involves going into a certain type of company, you really want to look at what firms do that and what firms tend to feed associates into those types of opportunities. And Fenwick was a kind of very dramatically different example where the majority of its clients tend to be tech and startup clients, and so naturally the opportunity there is a lot more prevalent and something I could take advantage of by moving.
Great. So now we're going to move on to your first couple years of practice. And I think that these first few years are really important and very formative years for your practice, whether you stay at a firm, go in-house, end up the government. So let's start with what you do first, which is pick a practice group. So Seth and Derek, would you guys like to speak on picking a corporate practice group?
I'm happy to jump in and kind of build on what Derek was saying just, a minute ago. I think similar to Derek, I didn't have a clear picture of what I wanted to do out of law school. And so I knew I didn't want to be a litigator. And so I thought, okay, corporate makes sense. And then I tried to find a place where I could have kind of the broadest learning experience as possible. And what I found was that M&A was like a really good vehicle for that because you get to learn a lot about how companies work, how deals are structured. You learn how to write contracts really well. You learn how to read contracts very well. And I felt like that was a skill set that, although I did not stay in sort of the corporate practice, ultimately served me quite well to kind of make a number of moves and to where I am right now. I think, though, within corporate, like as I said, I took a very generalist approach. I think M&A is about as broad as you can get. And I think what's good about M&A is that people go from that into all sorts of roles, into all sorts of companies. If you have a little bit more specific interest, though, I think it's great to, within corporate to pursue something that is more specific, right? Like I have a lot of friends who went into finance and now have great jobs in-house doing sort of, at banks or other companies dealing with interesting kind of debt instruments and lending instruments. I have other friends who knew they wanted to be, capital market securities lawyers, went directly into that practice and have really interesting jobs doing corporate governance, advising boards, et cetera. And so I think, it really depends, right? If you have a sense of what you want to do, I think great to kind of be focused in that. If not, though, I think what's nice about corporate, and at least the number of the disciplines, is that you can have a pretty broad range of experiences which are broadly applicable to almost any legal job.
Yeah, and I had a similar experience in picking practice groups, as Seth kind of elaborated for the M&A front. But one piece of advice I would have for you all that I didn't practice to the fullest extent, and now having done a couple years inside of a company that I wish I had done, is when you do the practice, let's say you're an M&A lawyer, really take advantage of the opportunities to pick up all the ancillary type subject matter that you encounter. A very kind of practical example that I give a lot of kind of people I talk to is you work on a disclosure schedule. And with the disclosure schedule, there are often many different practice groups involved. You have employment, you have licensing, there's IP, patents, such. And oftentimes you're under a timeline, so all you do is kind of fill out the shell, pass it off to the specialist, give them a deadline, have them come back to you, and you just put in their comments and you move on, right? Because you don't have time to dive deeply into it. But had I known what the kind of practice I do today, I would have spent a lot more time in instances like that to have a little deeper dive with each of these specialists. Like, why are you putting in these comments? What is it about this patent that requires disclosure? Because I think just by exposure and osmosis, you'll pick up a lot of general practice area tips that make it so that when you're in-house, you're not encountering it for the first time. And so that's something that, regardless of what practice group you choose, I think especially at larger law firms, if you do bigger deals, you're naturally going to encounter attorneys in other practice areas, and just use that opportunity to get almost free advice to you all. Because today, there are probably questions that I probably could have figured out in my practice had I done a deeper dive back in the day, but now if I call someone, I'll get charged for it. And so it's almost viewed as you have these free resources all around you. Granted, you have limited time and you're busy on your own deal and you have to get things done, but spend a few more minutes each time you're talking to a specialist just to learn a little more and kind of pick that up. You can add that to your knowledge library.
Great. So, Gali, you want to talk about picking litigation? Looks like we can't hear Gali.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. So what I didn't appreciate when I was in law school is that litigation is actually for the most part, the far less common route into an in-house job. Most of the time, litigation is outsourced. So the companies that have an in-house litigation practice tend to be bigger, much bigger companies that are heavily litigated against and are have a lot of regulatory prohibitions. So pharma has a lot, finance has a lot, insurance has some, and if you kind of work backwards, then thinking about if in-house is really your goal, thinking about the that kind of lend themselves to experience in those sectors and really try to get more experience in those sectors. So if the end goal is finance, then working with a lot of finance clients. And a lot of people say kind of similar things that you want to get the kind of good experience of when you're a junior, you're doing a lot more document review, you're doing a lot more of the substance or kind of the basics of it. And the older you get, really, you have to think about getting increased levels of responsibility and being much more targeted in terms of what you're looking for. So the more strategy, high level, thinking about the case and working backwards of trying to work with the clients, get a lot more of client counseling experience, because in-house you're not really doing the nuts and bolts of litigating. You're not necessarily writing the briefs or arguing the motions or taking the depositions, but you're thinking about the higher level strategy. So the more you're doing that at the firm, the more of an ancillary experience you're going to have, and you're going to be ready to when you make that transition.
Great. Oh, sorry, Gali. I think we've lost you. Marnina, do you want to talk about going into some other specialties?
Sure. I guess I don't think I realized that real estate was considered like a niche practice until I came to Amazon, because I was in New York and there's a lot of real estate going around. But I think if you like something, it's worth it to try it as a 2L if you have a like a summer experience at a law firm. And then if you like what you do, there's opportunities out there for to go in-house. They're definitely on the real estate front more in terms of going to a developer. That was a lot of where I saw my colleagues going in New York. But I think that there's opportunities everywhere. You just have to find them. And not just in real estate, but in other specialties as well. I know Amazon has, we're basically our own law firm, but there are lawyers that came from every practice across the whole spectrum here. And there's other companies just like Amazon out there. So there are jobs, and you should practice the law you like, and then you can find the job that fits that.
That's a really good point, Marnina.
This is Seth. I would just add, if you have a specific interest, I think it's great to really, pursue that in a niche practice. I can tell you right now, I spend my time in the data privacy world, and there is a dearth of lawyers who've been trained and have expertise in it, right? And so firms are struggling, companies are struggling to find resources. So, if you say, hey, this is something that I'm interested in, I would say you're definitely not going to be making a bad decision kind of pursuing that, or potentially pursuing other areas as sort of a specialty, even if it's not as broad in the first instance.
So, one thing, and everyone has pretty much touched on not only the types of practice groups to pick, but the type of experience that you should be getting. And from a recruiter standpoint, I get clients all the time telling me what they want these their candidates to have, what skills. So what it's very important to remember is once you leave Penn Law, once you're in New York, you are, or wherever you are now competing with the top lawyers in the entire country for these jobs. So I think it is incredibly important while you're at a firm to get the right type of experience, which has been touched on by everyone. So it's getting client contact, mentorship, and the practical drafting, writing, negotiating. Get all the experience you can, because you need to remember that while you're at firm X and you went to Penn Law, you will be up against someone from firm Y and went to another top law school. Does anyone have anything else to add on the experience that you should be getting to get in-house? I think we covered it well, but I don't want to leave that undone.
I would just say on the client contact point that it's really good to develop relationships with clients if you can, and try to become an expert, try to become a resource that they can call on you and ask you questions, and you become the point person. That's helpful both for business development, but I can tell you from experience that, when those clients are looking to hire, they'll remember you, and they'll call and ask if you're interested, or you'll be on their radar as a top person when their colleagues are saying, hey, we really need someone who does X or Y, and they're like, oh, I know this great person who's at this firm, we should call them. So developing those relationships with your clients, I think, is really important.
I wanted to add one other thing, which is, specific to litigators, that if you don't want to be a generalist, because most of the time litigation jobs, in-house litigation jobs, tend to have some kind of a focus on them, whether it's employment or product liability. In my case, I wanted to do government investigations, and so I was very, very focused when I was at the firm of getting the right experiences, and really being very proactive for myself, because I knew that that's what I needed to make that transition in-house, and being very, proactive and aggressive about getting the kinds of cases you want, getting the kinds of experiences. One of the things I would always tell junior associates at the firm is, you're the only person that can guarantee and is invested in yourself to make sure you get the right kind of experiences, and you have to not assume that anybody's going to do that on your behalf. So you have to really be focused on that with an eye towards, not just your time at the firm and developing yourself. While that's, very important, think about how you're going to be able to sell that and spin that, or, whatever later, if you're interviewing for in-house jobs.
And golly, that actually takes us nicely into our next slide. Let's assume that you are doing your best to get the experiences that Golly just mentioned, but you're just not getting it for the firm structure, what types of cases are busy, what have you. It may make sense to start thinking about making what I like to call an in-between move. You can't always get to an in-house job straight from your first law firm. And Derek had mentioned before that he moved firms. So Derek, I was wondering if you could just sort of give everyone a little bit more insight into your lateral move.
Yeah, and on that point of the in-between move, I think that's pretty critical. We all would love to have our dream job right away, and unfortunately, it's just hard sometimes, given what's available and who's networked in. And when I was at S&C looking to move to California, I browsed through some in-house opportunities, but they would have been almost settling, if you will, in the sense that yes, you got in-house, but they're probably larger companies. They weren't exactly in the industry or the field that I was interested in. But it would have been for the sake of moving in-house, and I found that going to Fenwick and spending almost 6 years there really helped open the door to much cooler things and things that I'd be much more excited about. And so just kind of what we've all been saying earlier is that you just kind of treat each position, each gig as an opportunity to learn more, make yourself more appealing and attractive in terms of your skill set and what you have to offer. And as that progresses, opportunities will come about. And with Fenwick specifically, as I said before, when you look at kind of the in-between move, if you have a type of company, industry, style of company in mind, you just have to focus on those law firms that serve them, because that's the natural way to get in, where they'll look to you, they'll think of you first, because you're the lawyers that they're working with, and if they need someone, they'll think of you. And so it makes perfect sense to try to figure out what firms really serve the type of company you want to be at. And for going to Silicon Valley, there were like 4 key firms that really dominate that market. And so getting to one of those was necessary in my perspective to get something I'd be really happy with, as opposed to kind of just settling for something that would take a random third-year associated M&A from New York without any kind of direct or indirect relevant experience, really.
Derek, I think you hit on all the points that I really wanted to cover as well. You know, one other things I would add is, how could you assess if it's time to start looking at other firms? Again, things like Derek said, and it takes a couple of years of practicing until you can narrow it down and sort of figure out what you like and what you don't like. And I'm using Derek as an example, where he was at SNC, realized he decided to want to get into the startup world. So it really made a lot of sense for him to make a smart lateral move. So look at your experience. Look at where people senior to you are going. I think that's very important. The other thing is, as in other practice groups, litigators, sometimes it makes sense to move to the government before you go in-house, another organization perhaps. And one other thing, you know, I made a lateral move myself. One thing that I see all of the time is, I don't want any of you to get held up or stalled because, well, I'm not getting the experience I really need at this firm, but I know it, and I know which partner to avoid in the hallway Friday at 6 o'clock who's going to give me the assignment, so let me just stay. You really need to remember this is an incredibly competitive market. In-house jobs are the most competitive, and if you're not out there getting the exact experience you need, someone else is. So on that note, let's move to the actual in-house job search. Gali, would you want to start about sort of the right time to when to look?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's not the same thing for everybody. You have to know when you feel like you've gotten enough experience. But for litigators, for the most part, it tends to be that you want to be at a firm for a decent amount of time and be ready to leave kind of when you're closer to being a senior associate. I left after 6 years, and for the most part, people that go in-house tend to have been there in their 4, 5, 6, 7 plus. Because when you leave too early, you don't necessarily have all the right types of roles for you. And you need to be sure that you have the right, just to the point that we were making before that Erica just emphasized, you need to have the right level of experience to be able to sell yourself for that type of role. When I started looking, I think I left a little bit too early and got very far down and was one of the last people in a search for a job, and then really got the feedback that I needed more experience. And I didn't think that they were right, but after time, I definitely got that I agreed with them that I needed more time to be at a higher level, a senior associate level, where you're thinking about strategy. And I think a couple of people have mentioned that your job in-house is to provide legal advice to the business, and you don't have time to write memos and write a really reasoned, thought-out approach for the most part. Oftentimes it's on your feet, in real time, kind of quick assessments, and you need to be able to be confident in yourself that you've done that. And most of the time that comes through more time at a firm when you've done the higher level strategic work.
Adam, you know, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. Do you have anything to add on sort of the right time to start looking?
Yeah, I think about the types of attorneys who come and work in-house at a university, and certainly we're looking for people with law firm experience, generally 3 to 7 years of experience, because the training that you get there and the diligence that you do there and the advising experiences that you have there, I think really set you on the right trajectory to pick up quickly when you are in-house. And I agree with what Galia was saying. I think there are a lot of differences between working in-house and working at a law firm, including the pace of work is usually quicker, and you don't have the time to go as in-depth on each project. So you really want an attorney who has the experience of taking a senior role on cases, taking an advisory role on cases, and working directly with clients. And generally, that's going to be someone with more experience.
And Marnina, for those of you who have less experience and are getting a little bit discouraged, Marnina, you want to sort of give your take on this?
Sure. So I left a firm after a little under 4 years. Just randomly got an email from a recruiter and followed it to Seattle. And I think that as long as you feel confident in your training and you feel confident that you've had client experience, you know how to understand the law and you know how to speak to people and advise, then you're going to keep learning at your next job. And if you have the opportunity, jump on it. I don't think you have to wait. I think waiting is always good, and the more experience you have at a firm, the better. But if there's something out there you like, I wouldn't be afraid to try it because you'll always learn as you continue going.
And Seth, I think this can lead us into you. Do you mind explaining a little bit about what is the right type of in-house role? And I use the word right loosely.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Erica. And I mean, I can just share some of my experience. I left private practice initially after just 3 years, so very junior. I had been doing M&A work at Cleary, as I said. I felt like I kind of really lucked into this job at a record label. I went to Sony Music doing digital distribution deals, and I thought, wow, this is so exciting. I'm going to be partying with Beyonce every day. I'm going to get invited to the Grammys. It felt so sexy and exciting. But what I learned very quickly was it was basically turning the same 2 contracts over and over and over again. And there was a learning curve, and it was interesting in the period in which, I kind of got up to speed. And then relatively quickly, it became less developmental and less interesting and less dynamic. And so I ended up going back to private practice before making a different move. So I think, for the right person who really loved music, that would have been like the perfect job. For me, it wasn't. And so I think when you're looking at opportunities, it's really important not to just take the first bite necessarily that comes up, particularly if you're unhappy, but at the law firm, I mean, but instead to really think about, is this role developmental? What is the variation in the work? What are the skills that I'm going to get here, and how does that relate to what I want to do long term? How does this position me? I can tell you, having worked in a number of organizations that hire lawyers from firms, oftentimes there's a view, okay, great, we can get someone who wants to get out and kind of give them the same grunt work to do, and this is not a role where there's going to be a lot of developmental opportunities, right? And people are sometimes aware of that, and you want to make sure that you're being really thoughtful so you don't end up in one of those opportunities, because very quickly you might get bored and you may find that you're that it's harder to kind of make a move to something more interesting. So I think a lot about what you want your career to look like and sort of what are the things that you like doing to help assess if any individual role is the right one.
Great. And Seth, you touched upon taking a job because it seemed sexy and cool. And that leads me to Derek. Derek, I'd like you to sort of talk to people about startups, sort of briefly. I know that startups are incredibly desirable, but not every startup is going to be a great role. So you just give some.
Yeah, absolutely. I think first kind of figure out what startup you'd like to work for. It's probably near impossible to try to figure out a place if you are kind of chasing the dream, the Facebook dream of success and all that you read about in Silicon Valley. I think what you really have to ground yourself in is, do I really like the team, and do I really believe in the business and what they're trying to do? Because other than that, if you can do more than that, then you should become a venture capitalist and invest and make yourself rich, because it's no way for us to really know. And so I think, say you have the luxury of deciding between a number of companies, you have to go for the leadership team that you really like working with and the passion for the business that they're doing. In terms of getting into them, and I think we'll get into this in a couple slides, with startups it is a less traditional path. It's not a general kind of path where they do outward recruiting and you send in resumes. I think the majority, especially when I worked at Fenwick, when they hired in-house counsel, were through networks. granted, the path of outside law firm lawyer becoming in-house law firm lawyer was pretty common, and I observed that a lot. So that might be the path if you had to kind of generalize the way to get into a startup. And so that kind of emphasizes the point I made about trying to pick the right firm that does that. But beyond that, it's network your butt off and make sure you just choose a company you're really excited about, because I think you may see statistics, and I think 99% of startups fail, and so you don't do it for that kind of glory. You kind of do it for the experience. And just kind of touching back on the prior topic about going in-house at what stage in your career, I know it sounds like there's a lot of momentum for staying in the firm because you get great education and experience, and it makes you a more attractive candidate for going in-house. But by no means is that the one path. I mean, I think I work with a lot of attorneys that are both, and some are great or some not great, and you can't really generalize fully with each way. And I think as long as you treat each experience as a learning experience, a paid MBA is the phrase our founder loves to use, is just going through various work experiences, whether you're in-house or at a firm, and making the best of it and figuring out ways where it can add to your ability to achieve the next stepping stone. I think you'll be just fine. You just kind of have that mindset of not just sitting there as assessing. If you sat in there and you were looking at the same two contracts and you weren't kind of proactively thinking about what do I want next, then you might just be stuck there for several years. But if you realize, all right, I've gotten what I need, I've learned, I've seen that industry, I'm ready to move on to the next thing, and I can add that to my arsenal, then that's great.
Great. So Derek, you mentioned networking your butt off. That let me back up really quickly. So how to find the role, I apologize. There is, as Marnina said, legal recruiters. If you're interested in going in-house, let legal recruiters know. We all don't have every in-house job, so it is important when you're ready to start looking to flag to them. Another way that legal recruiters, the way that we find people, is LinkedIn. So if you're ready to go in-house, your LinkedIn should be up to date. It should give someone a summary of what you do so that we can find you. There's online postings, working for current firm clients, and as Derek mentioned, networking your butt off. So we're a little bit behind schedule. So Adam, you want to give us your sort of story spiel on networking and how you got your job?
Sure, absolutely. And I think I tried all of the strategies that Erica just mentioned, including a recruiter and looking at online posts when I decided I was interested in shifting gears. And I also reached out to a lot of people, including law school friends. And this is a great Penn Law story because one of my friends realized I was looking to go in-house, and she worked at Johns Hopkins and said, have you ever thought about working in-house at a university? And honestly, I hadn't. I'd been doing work in my private time for a nonprofit education group in New York. And she said, well, why don't you combine your legal interests and your education interests and come meet with the people in the general counsel's office at Johns Hopkins University. So I went down there and I met with a great group of attorneys who worked in the office there, and I really got excited about this type of work, but there were no job opportunities at Johns Hopkins at the time, and the ones that came up weren't a great fit for my background. So about 6 months or so go by, and an opportunity actually came up at Georgetown University that seemed like a perfect fit. So I reached out to the folks I had met at Johns Hopkins University, and I said, this great position came up. I really enjoyed meeting you. I enjoyed the work. I'm excited. I think this could be the field I'm most interested in. They actually then helped get my foot in the door at Georgetown and reached out to folks at Georgetown to let them know that they had met with me, that I was someone who was interested in applying. And it's networking had always seemed like this theoretical principle to me, and how does it actually work, and how many people do you need to talk to, and for how long? But in my case, it really did work. This random conversation with a friend from Penn Law led to talking with folks at Johns Hopkins, which led to a good opportunity at Georgetown. So I'd really encourage you, when it's the right time, when you pick something you're interested in, talk to everyone you know about it, and hopefully it gets your foot in the door someplace.
Yeah, and to add to that, one thing I would advise all of you is to not be shy. reach out to anyone and everyone who you're comfortable doing so. See if you can take them for coffee. When you network, I think it's very important to not think of networking as you have an immediate goal. I'm going to have lunch with Adam Adler and he's going to pass my resume along to the GC of Georgetown University. Think of it much more as just a way to gather information. When you couch it that way, it becomes a much more comfortable conversation and it's planting seeds. So, it's let me take Adam Adler out for lunch and I just want to hear how he got where he did. I can promise you that 6 months down the line, if a job opens up and you continue to stay in contact with the people that you network with, Adam Adler is going to remember you. So, I'm happy to speak to anyone offline about networking. That's a lot of what I do in my coaching. But let's move on to the differences between in-house and law firms. This is really important and something that will certainly come up in any interview that you have. So why don't we start off with Marnina?
I think the difference is thinking holistically. You're like, you the client, you're the business, you're trying to figure out the best way to protect the company that you're a part of. And not, I know it's not about if you're missing a comma or there's a typo in the document, but it's really thinking about the larger picture. That's what I found to be the biggest difference. And it took me a little while to kind of change my mindset, but I definitely enjoy that perspective a lot more than I thought I would.
And what about you, Derek? What do you think some of the differences are?
One major change in how my practice has shifted is kind of risk tolerance and kind of business commerciality, in the sense that at a law firm, I mean, at Fenwick it was less so, but it still happened where, you give the great, perfect legal answer and then you move on. So the client will ask you one pinpointed thing, you'll answer it, and then the client moves on. You don't know what happens to it, and that's that. Whereas now, I quickly learned in the first couple months really is once I started thinking that way, it wouldn't hold water because it wouldn't actually solve the problem. Like I'd say, no, we can't do that because, it violates this certain law or whatever. And if I just said that, business doesn't happen. And so it forces you to go a few steps more of how do I really bring this to ground and have a solution that can help the business move forward and do what it needs to do. And so fortunately or unfortunately, the natural result is you do have a higher risk tolerance for things because you realize a lot of these perfectly legal answers just aren't practical and it won't help the organization. And so the idea is not just to be rowdy and take all risks, but think about risk mitigation, try to navigate solutions that go around it or figure out other ways to arrive at a similar result without incurring as much risk. And so that game has been a big part of my current practice of just kind of getting used to it and then figuring out ways to not just be totally unbridled with what I do, but achieving some kind of balance.
And what about you, Seth?
I mean, I'd agree with everything Marnina and Derek just said. I think, at a law firm, I have very distinct memories of saying to clients, you can do choice A or you can do choice B. Tell me how to execute. And when you're inside an organization, you become much more of an advisor and a risk partner, and it's much less about these discrete issues and much more about kind of holistically, as both of them said. I think the other piece of it, too, is just the pace is very different. I remember, again, being in private practice, I'd be on one deal for 6 months. I could spend 5 hours on one 2-page document. And now I feel like I work on 40 different things a day. I can allocate a very small amount of time to each one. But then when I leave, I'm usually done, right? And so it's a much more hectic during the day, much less unpredictable in the evenings and weekends. But you have to move much quicker and juggle a lot of different balls in the air while you're in the office during the day.
Great. So, because I want to make sure we have time for questions, let's move on to just advice. So, guys, within sort of the next, let's try to get to 3 or 5:20, sorry, I'm on Denver time. If everyone could just kind of go through and give some advice, what you wish you had known when you were in their position, being a young lawyer or law student. We can start with Adam.
Sure. I think one piece of advice is just once you've picked something that you want to do or an industry that interests you, just read everything about it. Talk to everyone about it. It shows your interest in it, your diligence in it, as we talked about, network within that industry, and just learn more. It's amazing how many people will have coffee with you just because of their love of their work, and they want to share information with you and someone who's excited about it. So I would say read everything, talk to everyone, and just go after something you want, and don't be afraid to take a leap into a job that you're interested in.
And before we get to Derek, if you guys have any questions, I believe there's a text box that you can type them into, and Danielle, it will sort of look through them and find some. So if you have any questions, now's a good time to start typing them in. Derek, on to your advice.
Yeah, just to repeat something I said before, is treat every opportunity as a learning experience. I mean, you're not wasting time at the law firm. If you're at a law firm right now, you're not wasting time at your less than optimal in-house position if that's where you are. I think each opportunity has something to add. And so as long as you have that perspective and mindset, I think you'll naturally just kind of grow and more doors will open because you'll just get better and better. So don't feel like there's this rush or this urge to kind of make moves right now. I mean, be in the current moment that you're in, really enjoy it, try to get the best and the most kind of skills and knowledge you can out of it, and then when the next opportunity arises, you do the same.
Great. Golly?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everybody, and I would say the one thing is that it sometimes takes longer, than you expected, and the first opportunity you think is not going to be the right one for you. And so something that I did, kind of a practical piece is that I wish I had done sooner was, when you're at the firm, you're really busy with your day-to-day work, which you should be. But if you have an eye towards going out, you should make an effort every week. Every week I challenge myself to get lunch with one person, send an email to one person, send in one application, update a resume, just like small, discrete chunks of tasks that you can feel like you're making progress in, because sometimes it can take 6 months or a year or even more to make progress and get interviews, and sometimes then it makes you kind of feel a little bit stuck. And if you make kind of plans for yourself and make some progress on that, you're going to feel like you're doing something and the time is well spent.
Marnina?
In an effort not to repeat anyone, since I agree with everyone's advice, someone once told me when I was a first year, and all of a sudden you start getting all these emails and calls from recruiters, and your first instinct is to ignore it because you're like, I'm not ready to leave. But someone told me just to pick up the phone and to look at the email and respond and have conversations. And for everyone who's here that's a junior associate at a law firm, like, just start doing that. You can start talking about what you're interested in. Recruiters can give you advice. Then when that one email comes through on a slow Friday, you don't ignore it, for what it's worth.
And Seth, you're the last one, so you can't repeat any advice.
Okay. So then I think the one thing that I would say that hasn't been mentioned, and I'd really target this to the law students, is start talking to people now to understand what their days are like and what are the things that they do, and learn more about the practice of law. I didn't do that, and I really, to be honest, I had no idea what it meant to be an associate or a lawyer or anything until I showed up at my law firm as a summer and started churning out assignments. And if I had spent more time as a student listening to lawyers explain the way that they spend their time and the things that they do, I would have been much more educated and equipped to make decisions, back then. And so I'd encourage everyone to invest the time and energy to do that if you're still in law school.
I think all of that is fantastic advice. I am going to turn it over now to Danielle. Do you have some questions for the panelists?
I want to make sure that the attendees know how to add their questions. So if in the screen there should be a small box to the left of the slides that we see up here that says chat. So if you click on that chat box, you should be able to type in your questions and I'll see them and they will come, I'll be able to share them with the panelists.
So I guess while we're waiting, I can ask a question. I am going to, let me ask, let's go back to sort of finding, you know, Seth, can you kind of just talk to us a little bit about how you were able to find your job since you've had 2 in-house positions at this point?
Sure. I mean, I've had a few actually. I guess, gosh, I'm on. I graduated in 07. I've moved around a little bit. My first job out of Cleary at the record label, it was just from I saw postings online, and I applied, and I thought, no one ever pays attention to that. My resume is going to go into a black box, and I can't tell you how much that's not the truth. I submitted a resume. I got a call. I was an M&A lawyer. This was to become a music lawyer, and I was able to talk my way into the job. And so I definitely say apply online if you see postings. I can tell you as someone who hires people, we definitely pay attention to them. When I was back in private practice and thinking about making my move to MasterCard, that was really from networking. I was talking to an old friend of mine from MasterCard about how I was interested in making a change. She was at MasterCard switching to a new job and was like, hey, why don't you apply for my old job? And it just so happened that the hiring manager and their manager were all Penn Law alums. And so being a Penn student and coming from with a recommendation, from the time I heard about the opportunity to the time I got the offer, it was maybe a week and a half or 2 weeks. So it moved very quickly. And then my current role came out of, the networking point. Again, I did a CLE with talking about privacy issues. And then when my current opportunity came up, someone made a phone call, and they happened to ask one of the people that I was on a panel with at the CLE, and I had impressed some people from doing the CLE, and that's how my name got on the radar. So I think it's really important to be proactive and also to let people know when you're interested, and then to do the networking thing. So it kind of tells all the stories that we've talked about today.
Erica, we've got a couple of questions from people online, and they are about more of the nuts and bolts of the application and interview process. So one in response, I think, to the recent comment about the resumes not going into a black box, sort of what catches your eye in a resume or cover letter that makes an application worth pulling for an interview. And a second similar question about any difficult or surprising in-house counsel interview questions either that you were asked or that you ask of applicants.
Derek, do you want to take the first part of that question since you are a GC?
Yeah, and then hiring isn't massively in high volumes right now, but definitely what would catch my eye is, I guess, first and foremost, is that they would be coming from someone I know, and I know that kind of sucks generally because then it kind of feels like the unknown third-party websites where you apply don't work as well, but it does and gets to the top of the list. But then there's also a strong relevance that comes through on the resume, and our business is not super well known, and so it does take kind of special research knowledge of a candidate to really figure out what we do and then highlight those points in his or her resume. And I've definitely seen lots of resumes that just say they're interested in entertainment, period, or they love internet and technology. And while it is relevant at a high level, that really is at the core of what we do. And so to really highlight skill sets that would be applicable to our business model, I think, is a way to really catch attention. I think in the startup world probably helps a lot because every group of startup founders is very particular about how their business is perceived and portrayed, and if you're able to line them with that quickly, and that might be with informational interviews, trying to get in touch with people at the company just to meet them and learn more about the business. I think that will help a lot more with the people reviewing resumes within the company.
And I can speak on submitting resumes through the internet. I know that sometimes, and this is particularly with larger organizations, sometimes the first people who take a look at your resume is actually not a person, and it's an algorithm. So I think it is quite important to have your resume specifically tailored for each job that you apply for. Make sure that you really look at the job description, and if you have the skills that are in there, it needs to be reflected in your resume. Again, and I look at resumes all day long. Some of this might seem obvious. I do M&A work. You know what that means. You know who doesn't know what M&A work is? Maybe the HR person reading the resume. So make sure it's an easily digestible piece of your work that someone who's not a lawyer can really pick it up and understand. So yeah, and Danielle, what was the second question?
Erica, I can take the interview question.
Yeah, great.
So I only offer to take it because Amazon uses behavioral interviews. So my advice is to, wherever you go, make sure you know what kind of interviewing they're doing and prepare for it. I recently gave an interview to someone who had obviously not prepared for the type of interviewing that Amazon does, and it was obvious, and they did not get an offer. So I would just make sure you do all the online research you can, find out anything you can about that company, so that when you go into that interview, you are very prepared for whatever is in store for you.
This is Seth. Can I just add on that? I think it's really important when you're getting ready to do a job interview to be able to articulate a story of how all of your experiences up until now have kind of led you to this place, right? And so, okay, you went to law school because of this, you went to this firm because of this, an interest that led you to this other experience, and that's why that makes you the perfect candidate for this job. And being able to, I can tell you as someone who does interviews, people may not have a ton of time to review your resume in advance and to kind of link all of that up. So if you can do that work and someone says, tell me about yourself, or tell me about your experience, or tell me about what you do right now, if you can think about how to answer that in the front end in a way that makes you seem like an obvious candidate, I think you're going to be, you've already done the work for the hiring manager.
Yael, are there any other questions?
There's another question specific about people who are litigators. So examples of possible in-house roles you've seen former law firm litigators take on. I know we spoke about this a little bit earlier, but any other insight into that?
Adam, do you want to take this?
Sure. I guess I've seen two different types of paths. One is obviously at big companies, big organizations, usually corporate, who actually have a team of in-house litigators, because as we discussed before, they're often at smaller organizations. Litigators are used outside the law firm at private firms, or outside the company from private firms. But also, I'd suggest looking at smaller organizations who just have a few people in their general counsel's office, because oftentimes they're looking for more generalists, and litigators often have some of the skills that are required in small offices, having dealt with internal investigations and allegations in cases relating to discrimination. So I think that a lot of the skills you get working as a litigator at a law firm prepare you pretty well for some of those in-house generalist jobs at small organizations. So if you're not choosing the big companies, I do think it makes you a good candidate for some of the small companies' more generalist jobs.
To add to that quickly, as a recruiter, the largest amount of jobs for litigators that we tend to see are jobs like Golly's, the enforcement and investigation side. Employment litigation is also very prevalent. Most large companies definitely need an employment litigator. Privacy and IP litigation are also some really important skills that you can have as a litigator. It's not to be said that general litigators don't get in-house jobs. They certainly do, but I generally find that there's a lot more legwork needed with networking and using connections. Lucky for all of you guys, you're all either current Penn Law students or Penn Law alums, and you have a phenomenal network to tap into. And I really urge all of you to do that. Even just for me, going through my contacts to find panelists for this position, for this webinar, I could have picked 25, 30, 40 people who all have incredibly interesting, phenomenal jobs and who are willing to do this. So, you know, in kind of closing, use the law school. It's a fantastic group of alums and students and career planning. You know, your involvement at Penn does not stop once you get your actual JD.
Well, thank you, Erica, and everybody else.
Yeah, so, you know, thank you to the panelists, and thank you to everyone who's listening. And I think we've done our hour. So unless anyone has anything else to add, I think we should, yeah.
All right. Thanks again, Erica.
Thank you, everyone.